right, hello everyone, and welcome to Rise Zion. My name is Seth, and I am back here on the show with Ryan Shanahan, who wrote the book called The Saints Who Built America. He actually spent 2 years writing this book and doing research into the many ways that Latter-day Saints have impacted U.S. history, and most notably and most relevant to our time right now, the elections, right? So Ryan also hosts a show, and that show is called All About Your Faith. And he actually, on the show, talks about some of these things that are in his book. Now, Ryan, why don't you go ahead and just give us a little introduction about yourself if you want to, for the people who don't recognize your name.
Well, it's good to be back with you, Seth, and thanks for having me again. Well, like you said, I've spent a lot of time in the last year and a half to 2 years on this research because I was profoundly interested in what Latter-day Saints have done in America in shaping America. And we have to remember, this stuff isn't well known. Most members at least have some kind of a tertiary idea or understanding of church history. But what about the greater impact? How has that history affected culture, community, lifestyles across the US? And even though we've been about 1 to 2% of the population, I tell you, the impact is way more substantial than I ever could have known. I can't tell you how many times I came out of my study chamber talking to my wife going, you got to see this. You got to see this. It's absolutely incredible. And
how we've impacted. Well, that was something from our other videos that I really loved about your presentations, is that you talk about how Latter-day Saints represent such a small percentage of the population. We're a very small church, right? Nevertheless, we seem to have a disproportionate impact on all sorts of things, including politics.
Yes, and literally it is all sorts of things, and that's what this book is about. So it's almost 600 pages, and I've got hundreds of academic citations going over this history that people just don't know about. I think that's unfortunate. It's almost criminal that people don't know about this, because it opens up the doors for so many more conversations with our friends and neighbors about who we are. What are the Latter-day Saints? What have we done? I think if you ask your neighbor down the street, hey, what do you think about the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons?
Oh, well, Ryan, we're so nice. We're such nice
right?
people.
We're such nice people. Yeah. That's about all they know, right?
That's all they know.
You ask them anything substantial, and they don't have anything to add. And I think part of that is our fault, right? We don't know our history that well. And I guess
and we don't toot our own horn, really.
Right. Yeah. Members just don't do that. Tend to be very humble, right? The people who have made significant contributions in science, medicine, technology, they often don't take credit for their work. And that's also highlighted in this book. It is part of this legacy is part of this marvelous work and wonder that God is doing, right? It's not just spiritual things. Spiritual things can be manifested in other ways, in contributions to humanity, things that make our lives better.
Bringing about the fullness of time.
Exactly, yeah. All good things come from God, right? We know that expression. We have that expression. That means all things, right? So, including in art, science, medicine, politics, we can find this work going forth. And these are excellent conversations to have with people that you work with. And I'm just excited to get into it.
Right. Well, let's get started. So so we just went through the election, and I think a lot of us were kind of apprehensive about what was going to happen during the elections. I mean, the people were talking about Ezra's eagle prophecy, and they're like, I don't know if that's right. But we made it through. Trump's now in office. But I mean, you're going to share a story with us that's really interesting, and it has to do more with women's rights. And I think that's really interesting, because I think that even though people say that we're very nice, they kind of have this negative perception of the Latter-day Saints as kind of a misogynistic faith. I don't know if that kind of characterizes it very well because of the whole polygamy issue. Yeah. However, you're going to share with us something interesting that kind of counteracts that, I believe.
Very, very much so. I've never understood why people get this in their head, that there's some sort of misogyny going on in the church. It just has never really been the case. We have a profound history that is absolutely opposite to that.
Hmm.
And I have a wonderful story I'm going to share with you. Let's go ahead and get into it. But I'm going to preface it. I'm going to go over a little bit of details just to highlight the significance, not just in the 19th century, but today. And that is to say, Latter-day Saints, you will find them. Again, we're only a tiny part of the population, but you find them all over U.S. history. It's a part of this amazing work that I think God is doing. And of course, last week we had the 47th presidential inauguration. This is a big deal in U.S. history. This is going to be one for the history books for sure. But it got me thinking. Okay, what are some of the ways that Latter-day Saints have been impacting our political sphere? And this is a significant thing to talk about. It's often said that politics is downstream of culture, and I like that expression. Right? It informs, our culture informs kind of what our policies become ultimately. And so, how have Latter-day Saints affected that culture, and how is that manifest in things like government? Well, we have a long history of this too. Most recently, we can consider that there are currently 9 LDS congressmen serving right now, 3 in the Senate, 6 in the House. And there's also been those who have made cultural strides in this regard too. So back in 2015 to 2019, Representative Maya Love served Utah's 4th congressional district, and she was the only Republican. You did? Okay, great. Yeah, so you know about her. Yeah, she seems really cool. I don't know her very well. I just did a little bit of research on her, but yeah, she seems really cool. And what people don't know is that she's the daughter of Haitian immigration. She was the only Republican in the Congressional Black Caucus and is the first female Black Republican elected to Congress. So pretty big strides there, yeah? Yeah. There's also, some of you might remember that the Tabernacle Choir actually sang for the 2016 election, January 2017, when Trump's first term. They were there, and they actually sang for many presidents in the past. So big deal. They're very represented in presidential spheres. And this is a favorite of mine. Again, this is one I think is criminal that we don't teach in school. We don't know about this person. This person is Esther Peterson. So she was educated at Brigham Young University. She was a member all her life, and she was the highest ranking woman in the John F. Kennedy administration.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Now, what did she do in this role? Well, she gave us some of the first laws over equal pay for equal work.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
She also gave us food labels and sell-by dates for perishable products. She also gave us consumer protection laws. And what were these laws protecting consumers from? From false advertising. These are huge things. But she worked hard for the John F. Kennedy campaign in Utah. She helped get him elected. And then she did a lot of great work for him during his time in office. And thereafter, she continued long after. All her life, she was serving consumers and women's rights and did just amazing things. Let's see, I've got one other here. Well, we all know the name Apostle Reed Smoot, of course. Right. He's a famous history there. We even covered that in one of our last episodes. Now, he served concurrent as a state senator, which is why I'm bringing him up. A lot of people don't know this, but he's responsible for where the U.S. Supreme Court building stands today.
Really?
Of course, initially, the controversy was that there was maybe a conflict of interest. They didn't know if he should be allowed to take his Senate seat. Congress was actually considering religious rules or religious qualifications in order to serve in office. Can you imagine in the United States? Right?
Yes, we talked about
you have to be a certain religion.
Yeah. We both, I know that you do, but I remarked that it's such a strange thing to consider that people could be excluded from serving in public office because of their religion. This is something that's so beyond us right now.
Yeah, right. But, and it wasn't long ago, right?
Yeah.
This was our great-great-grandparents. This was the start of the 20th century, crazy. Right? Just over 100 years ago, right? 120 years ago, actually, almost exactly, because it was between 1904 to 1908 that the Smoot investigations were going on.
And it was because they wanted to keep the Catholics out, right?
And that was a big part of it. Yeah. Catholics,
The
the
freaking
Catholics and
Protestants
the
wanted to
Mormons.
keep the Catholics out.
Yeah, it was a big part of it.
Oh boy.
Which of course continued on. It's just amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
these religious rivalries have been going on for centuries, and they haven't stopped necessarily. They've maybe gotten better, but I think that there are plenty of Latter-day Saints today who can say they're not that much better.
Yeah, in some ways, they still have the same kind of prejudices. Anyway.
But that's all to say, Reed Smoot, he went on to win the affection of his fellow congressmen, and he did great in office. He served over 20 years in that position. He was on all kinds of councils, and he was regarded as one of the most knowledgeable people in government about the government. And to that point, he was twice asked to run on the Republican ticket for president. Twice. He was the favorite. They wanted him to be president, only if he would give up his religion, which of course he wouldn't do. And so he didn't end up running. But that's significant, right? It shows his impact. And well, I'll just leave it at that. But those are just a few little stories that are more recent that show this impact that Latter-day Saints have had in our country, in our politics, in our policies, in our culture. And it is profound, and it's also wonderful. I think it's an amazing thing to consider how God has inspired his people to do good things in the world.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting to consider. Just going back to what we were saying before, how Latter-day Saints have had a disproportionate impact. But anyway, let's dive right into it and get into the story about the election.
For sure. So this takes us back even further in history into the 19th century, and has us look at the situation in the U.S. and in the U.S. territories during the women's suffrage movement. Now, significantly, I mean, this is the main thing to consider. I won't bury the lead. Latter-day Saint women had the right to vote 50 years before any other woman in the United States, right? 50 years before the 19th Amendment that made that possible. That was the year 1920.
Yeah,
again,
very
not that
significant
long.
because
Just 100
our
years
country
ago.
is not that old. 50 years is a big difference. So
yeah. And so just think about that for a second, because I don't think a lot of people appreciate the significance of this. You've got people like Susan B. Anthony who are going around the country, traveling the world, giving talks to Congress, talking with the presidents, trying to get women the right to vote, to participate in government, to have more control and autonomy over their life, their laws that are going into effect in their communities, and the like. And Susan B. Anthony, she worked very hard for this, and we remember her, rightly so, but she never saw the fruit of her labors, right? It never came to fruition during her lifetime, except among the Latter-day Saints. And yet we don't remember the Latter-day Saint women who also championed this cause. People like Emmeline Wells, who was this great pioneer of the Relief Society. She did so much for the Relief Society and for the church as a whole. She also went traveling the country, talking in Congress, traveling the world, talking about women's suffrage. We don't have a coin with her picture on it or anything.
No.
Not that we need one, but it'd be nice to remember some of these figures. Is what I think,
Yeah.
And it's also interesting. Emmeline Wells was really good friends with Susan B. Anthony. They were like sisters, these two. In fact, when Susan B. Anthony was dying, she gifted one of her gold ring to Wells as a token of their friendship. And years before that, the Relief Society, under the direction of Wells, had supplied Anthony with a bolt of fine Utah silk. The Relief Society had been producing their own silk to make their own nice clothes for a time. And they gifted her this whole bolt of it. And she made this gorgeous dress. Anthony said it was her favorite dress. And it's on display today in her home that was turned into a museum. I think it's in Rochester, New York. I think that's right. But anyway, it's at her home that's now a museum, and it's on display. Her favorite dress, which was made from Utah Mormon silk. And these were all just, tokens of their friendship. But and Anthony was super excited for the Latter-day Saints when they got the right to vote in 1870. She
Way
supported
earlier.
them through it. Yeah, way earlier, right? Yeah. And I just think it's such a shame that we have figures like this and we have examples of successes, early successes in these types of cultural changes, but we're not taught them in school. You know, they're not prominent figures, they're champions.
No, and something actually that I heard recently, and it was actually a compelling argument. I remember where I heard it from, but it goes something along the lines of, if the church is true, right, you would expect that they would be ahead of the curve in a lot of like some of these social issues, and
yeah,
put aside, some of these things. Well, I mean, and that's like an argument that the anti-Mormons will like be against the church, claiming that the church is misogynist, this and that and the other. But
yeah,
we're not taught these things that you're pointing out here. They were ahead of the curve. I mean, in many ways, we still are. So,
yeah.
I mean,
yeah, in so many ways. I mean, we were sending out female companionships as missionaries as early as the late 19th century. So the 1890s, we had female companionships going out on missions. That was unheard of for the time period.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, the female members of the church have always had the equal participation in church affairs when it came to sustaining of our church representatives.
Right.
And of course they've had their own presidencies as well. They've been instrumental, monumental in the development and the sustaining of the church because they were equal partners with the men in this regard. I can say that it was initially proposed as an experiment by Congress. Those who would otherwise would have objected to anything that the Mormons were doing out in the territories, because 19th century politics were so crazy, and the Latter-day Saints were often used as a scapegoat and a smokescreen to cover up other issues going on in the country. So they're like, oh, we'll poke at the territories. They're not that important, so we'll just shove our issues off on the Mormons. And so one of those issues, of course, was the topic of polygamy, which both the Democrat and Republican Party had made a topic for campaigns as early as I'd say the 1860s. So they wanted to use women's suffrage as a means to get rid of polygamy. They thought, surely these women are oppressed and they're forced into these relationships. If given the opportunity, they'll vote it out.
Interesting.
Well, the exact opposite happened, actually. You had a march of 3,000 women in Utah Territory were marching in protest of the federal government's interference and in defense of plural marriage. And of course, they ended up voting to keep it. So that's an interesting topic in and of itself. But that's why it was initially given to the Latter-day Saints as an experiment. It was then taken away a few years later for a period of time, but reinstituted in the 1890s. And this is where we get into the main point of this story with a character named Maddie Hughes Cannon. She was the first female state senator in the United States, and she was a Latter-day Saint. Again, misogyny? I don't think so.
Yeah, that's fascinating, though, because you wouldn't ever think that. Like, people just wouldn't be aware.
Right. Yeah, and it's unfortunate. I mean, you try to look her up, and to me, it almost looks like some of her history has been kind of removed, or it's just not very prominent. So it's kind of hard to find some details on her on government websites. I think that's kind of interesting. Like, okay, I don't really know what's going on there, but I'm just going to put a pin on it. But it's something that I kind of been aware of when I was doing research about it. It's interesting. But she was one of the first females, first women to actually register for vote as well. On top of it all, it seems that she was the first woman to register to vote.
She was like on top of the civic issues. She wanted to be involved.
She was well educated and well respected in her community. She went out, she got education initially at the University of Deseret, which became the University of Utah. She also got medical training at the University of Pennsylvania and others. She had other degrees as well. including in chemistry. And she was the only woman in a medical class of 75, and she was told to sit apart from the rest of her classmates so that she wouldn't be a distraction to them or bother them, right? Because they didn't respect her back east in the States, in the free states, right? They didn't respect women, and they didn't give her much attention. But she graduated, and at 25 years old, she went back to Utah Territory and opened a private practice. And soon she became the first head of surgery at the medical hospital there in Utah. She held classes to train other women as nurses. So she was very into education, very into promoting women in her community. She did a lot to ensure and spoke often about making women the best they could be, more educated, more capable, more independent, just trying to magnify their abilities, their callings, their family life in every aspect. And this is, she wasn't unique in this. Many of the Relief Society women and presidencies had the same kind of value, and you can see this with Senator Cannon very much embracing that kind of attitude about being the best they could be in all aspects. And I love that. I absolutely love that. And then that the ideal for all of us, we all just want to be the best we can be, right? Live up to our personal ambition and potential. Thank you. Yeah. And yeah, that's kind of what being a member of the church is all about, in my opinion. It's one of the things that I think sets us apart, is this idea of striving to meet our potential, and everything that we do within the church, all of the callings that we accept willingly and sacrifice to magnify, is about, you know, building ourselves new skills, making ourselves more capable.
Useful. If there's anything lovely or good report, we seek after these things, right?
There it is. Yeah. You know, like even this conversation we're having right now, it is a skill to know how to interview, to know how to talk to a camera, to know how to put a presentation out there. These are things that are not necessarily things that I am all that great at, or things that
yeah, but I mean, if you go to a foreign country and you're required to talk to people for 2 years, you get kind of good at talking to people.
You do, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And my mission experience definitely helped with that. And it's something that I like to be able to do, even though it's maybe not my greatest skill set. I make myself uncomfortable coming out and being able to share these things, because, well, one, I think that these are important topics and conversations to have, but it's also, it pushes me, it challenges me, gives me something to try to become better at, right?
I find that as well. I like to have a little challenge and try to get better.
For sure.
That's great. All right, so Miss Cannon, what happened with her?
So we went over a little bit of her early life. Now, as we move into the late 19th century, Utah is on the verge of a big change. It became a state finally, for the first time, in 1896, just before the Spanish-American War. And guess who's on the ticket for senator? Is women for the first time. It's this amazing spectacle, right? Yeah. So you've got a bunch of women, including Emmeline Wells. She ran on it as well, under the Republican ticket. Maddie actually ran on the Democratic ticket. And she was running against, of all people, her husband, Angus Cannon, who was on the Republican ticket.
Okay, that's crazy.
Right? Yeah. So you can imagine the newspapers had a field day with this, like, oh my gosh, this is the juiciest thing ever. We've got not only women running for this position, but we have a couple. We have this married couple. Not only a married couple, but Angus is a polygamist, and Maddie is his fourth wife.
I can imagine some of the headlines didn't age well. In terms of,
but they're fun to
I
read.
guess that Mormons can't control their crazy wives.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you actually had dueling newspapers. You had on the one hand things like the Salt Lake Tribune were saying that you should send Angus, send him to the office. He's deserving of it. And on the other hand, you had other local newspapers saying no, let Angus stay home and tend to family affairs and have Maddie. She's the better man, right? Of the two. And it was just so these dueling newspapers. Well, and anyway, Maddie, of course, won the election. She won it handedly, like by several thousand votes. And I think the most significant thing about this outcome is that it is reported there was no ill will between, like this didn't affect their marriage at all. They had a great relationship and they were fine. Like there's no indication that there was any strife in their relationship because she won over him. And I think, again, doesn't that set a precedence of what our faith and what the families that we're trying to build are really all about, right? We support each other no matter what we do and what happens. We're there for each other. And we want to see people around us and the people in our family succeed in whatever they're putting their mind to. Maddie was no pushover. She was educated. She spoke her mind. She knew what she wanted and she went for it. And she had the support of her family and friends. And she was a very, very good senator, I would say. Looking at the history, there's not a whole lot there, but what is there is significant. So some of the significant things that she did while she was in office, she served a single term, 4 years. She oversaw a smallpox outbreak that affected the community. This was in spite of vaccines being available at the time for it. And, she's a medical doctor. She knows about this stuff. And unfortunately, there's widespread fear about vaccines at that time. I think we can relate to that.
Interesting. It's kind of like, it's almost like God put her in place because she happened to be a medical doctor.
You would think, right? Yeah.
Kind of seems
makes
like,
makes sense. Yeah.
Kind of seems like, hearts, anyway.
Yeah. So she had a massive campaign to educate the community about vaccines and their safety. There was stories going around like, oh, if you get the vaccine, you might have to have your arm amputated at the injection site.
Gosh.
This was a real fear. The people that they just didn't know. There wasn't this kind of education.
You better
widespread.
Just stop talking right now, Ryan. People's heads are going to
Oh, right. Right. So she promoted the vaccines, but of course that wasn't going to be enough. So she implemented other measures to try to stop or stem this spread of smallpox. And one of the things she did is she eliminated communal cups at public drinking fountains. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but this was a very common practice up into the 20th century, where you'd have a public drinking fountain like at a park, and there'd be a chain with a cup hanging at the bottom of it.
Right.
And that was for everybody. Everybody would use that to get from the fountain and then drink from that same cup.
That's disgusting.
Yeah, it's a great way to spread disease, right? Right.
All right, I have a very important question. Was she responsible for individual sacrament cups?
Almost.
I really want her to be responsible.
Yeah. I know. I wanted her to. I wanted that too. But actually, this was already an issue that the Relief Society was dealing with. And so she supported the effort, but it was made in conjunction with other Relief Society presidencies that were pushing congregations away from the communal cup.
Effort. Okay.
It was a joint effort, yeah. And it didn't happen until a few years later. But it was significant because we did get the individualized cups prior to the 1918 Spanish flu.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was a big deal, right?
Was a big deal. That was
yeah.
awful.
And we don't know, there's no way to know how that may have impacted things, how many lives may have been spared because of these types of policies going into place. But we can suspect that they had to have been significant. Utah was one of the last places on the planet affected by the Spanish flu.
Interesting. That is so fascinating. That is really, really interesting.
Yeah. Of course, it's interesting to read some of those stories. I think LDS Living did an article in 2016 about that time period when they were moving to the individualized cups. And they were they mentioned a number of stories from the time period of how the cup could be contaminated with whatever the congregation had eaten their meal before services.
Yes,
And I was like, oh,
yeah,
well.
that's disgusting. But
Many of
yeah,
the
I
young
mean,
women
Spanish
would tend
flu,
to,
so yeah,
yeah, right, yeah, yeah. But yeah,
yeah,
there was a number of people in congregations who were like, I'm not going to have sacrament today because I'm not drinking out of that cup.
yeah. Oh.
That's how gross it was. Yeah. So yeah. Anyway,
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 yes, that was a good tangent, but that was a cool tangent.
it was a good tangent.
Yes, so
So one of the last things one of the other big significant things that she did during her term was she oversaw the protection of patients by ensuring the enforcement of medical standards and certifications. So there was this movement going around at the time that wanted to abolish this board, this medical board that was supervising the certification of certain medical professionals and specialists. And they just, like, I don't think we need this. We want to get rid of it. We want to spend the money elsewhere. She's like, no, we need this. We need to maintain the standards and ensure that those standards have oversight because we need to protect the patients. And so I think that was a really big deal and a good call on her part. So there you go. That's a little bit about Maddie Hughes Cannon. Of course, there's a whole lot more there to her life. Fascinating things. She was actually pregnant during her time in office, and she retired soon after. And it's actually probably why she retired. Is she just given birth to a son, and she ended up retiring to California to raise him there. And I think that it seems that she lived a good and happy life there in the end. But her association with the church was hard, and it didn't make things easy for her in many respects, mainly because of the bigotry and persecution of outsiders. But she got through it. She bore her burdens, I think, very well. And it's hard for many of us to imagine what so many of our fellow saints endured back in those years. That, again, they weren't that long ago. This is just over 100 years ago. And
I imagine that probably helped her. I mean, she probably faced bigotry from all sides, but probably mostly from others, because that's kind of tends to be that way.
It does seem to go
But
that way.
it probably was a good benefit or a good feather in her cap because she was an educated member of the church who had served as the Utah senator like long before that was thing. So
yep,
he was doing it before it was cool. So
yeah, it was a really big deal. What a transformative age that we don't talk about, unfortunately, enough. It's too often forgotten. Many people go through their lives not knowing these histories that are so significant, that can impact people's lives, change perspectives. And I'm doing my little part to try to get that out there. And this really, I think it's a great addition to the videos that we've done together in the past. So some of you might remember, you've got a bunch of new subscribers, by the way, so they probably don't know. But I did a 4-hour interview with Seth a while back, just as this book came out. And we did 4 episodes talking about different stories. And there were some really fun stories. We had James Fletcher, who saved NASA and spearheaded the space shuttle program. We had the LDS influence over country music, blues, and rock and roll with the inventions of the steel pedal and electric guitars.
Yep.
We had the Mormon pioneers influencing the 1902 Water Reclamation Act, which made possible for tens of millions of Americans to live now in the arid Midwestern states. And we also had the presidency of John F. Kennedy. Kennedy personally thanked the Latter-day Saints for making his presidency possible. And that was a fun story. This is just some of those little tidbits of how this LDS influence, this legacy of the church, has affected and shaped U.S. culture, communities, and in just so many profound ways. It's hard to really give that to you, but that's why I have the book, so that you can go in and check it out. And of course, this is part of a bigger project. The book is only the beginning. I want to turn this into a documentary, and so any support, right? It makes the history so much more accessible to so many more people. And over on my other channel, it's a small channel. I don't do a whole lot with it, but I'm doing some readings from the book. So they're about 10-minute little tidbits, little stories that you can share with your friends and family. It makes it so much easier to spend 10 minutes or so, and now you know a subject and you can go and have a conversation with somebody about it. It's all about creating new conversations to have with people to talk about the restoration.
Well, and really reframing the conversation. Just Mormons are so nice. Mormons helped elect JFK. Mormons helped, prevent
invent the
an outbreak of
TV,
the Spanish flu because of
the
sacrament.
Spanish flu, right? Yeah.
I mean,
amazing things. Yeah, there's so much. I mean, infant heart surgery. We all know that was Dr. and President Russell Nelson who invented that in the 1950s. The television was invented by a Latter-day Saint. We could go on and on. Honestly, there's so much. But I guess on another note, Seth, your channel is blowing up. It's doing so well. I'm so excited for you.
I'm really
I checked just before, and you've got like just over 6,000. I know your goal is to reach 10,000.
That's right.
Listen, guys, if you've made it to this part of the video, thank you. Thank you for watching. And please, you can help this. It's so easy. All you have to do is hit the like button. Maybe leave a comment below. That really pushes the algorithm to get Seth out to many, many more people. He's doing great things. And as a community of Latter-day Saints, there's so few of us, especially making content or putting out there. This is so important stuff. And I think we need to support each other. And I'm happy to be able to support Seth with this. And let's help him get to that 10,000 mark in the next 3 months. I think that's super doable, super doable, right? We could do it in 2 months easily. And all you've got to do, hit that subscribe button. If you can, share it out to a friend. Ask them to subscribe too. We would love that. If you would do that right now, that'd be so awesome. That pushes the algorithm, and give us a like. I want to give more content to you. Right now, I'm dressed up in my persona for All About Your Faith. If you want to check that out. Again, it's a small channel, so you might have trouble finding it, but maybe I'll send Seth a link you can put down in the description.
Yes, I will include a link in the description so people can find it, and then we can change together the zeitgeist surrounding Latter-day Saints as being nice people. I mean, that's so quaint. Yes. So quaint. So nice. Anyway. Thank you so much.
This has been a fun episode. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And thank you for battling this concept of Latter-day Saints as misogynist people. Thank you for your book. And thank you so much, everyone out there in the audience, for watching. And until next time, bye.